Hello all of you out there, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 most elite Ark dinos. And first up on the list we have the Carno, and this creature really does just feel premium and elite to me whenever I use it, albeit it isn't the most powerful creature out there, and loads of people prefer the Allo over this thing. But I'm not really one for the Allo hype. I don't know why. It is a great creature with a wealth of abilities, and it is a much more powerful creature than the Carno, but I just don't like using it at all, and I have no idea why really. But when I use the Carno, I absolutely love this thing for so many reasons. Namely, its size. This thing is the perfect size for me. It always is the right size for what I need it. Yes, it's not going to be the perfect size for caves, but you always have the baryonyx for that, and a small carnivore kind of makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, as I feel like I can sneak around the place more easily. But I'm not a PvP player, so that isn't really essential to me. And also I do like the speed and the stamina that the Carno has too, which some other Carnos lack. Other carnivores lack, not other Carnos. Well, it depends on the level really, but the Allo again does have great stamina too, and maybe faster than the Allo. I don't know why I love the Carno so much. Well, I do know why, but I don't really know why I don't like the Allo at all. But either way, this thing also does have a really great bleed ability, which works in its favour, and it deals a heck of a lot of damage. It is really worth to get Carno someday, but if you're more of an Allo person, then go with the Allo, I guess, but I can never really like that creature, and I don't really know why. Next up, we got the Theory, and this creature has to be included on the list. Like, the Tickle Chicken is one of the most essential harvesting dinos in the game. It just has to be here. It is a great gatherer of fiber, wood, thatch, berries, all of that it is great at, and it is also really great at harvesting meat as well, as it is one of the few herbivores which can actually harvest meat, which kind of doesn't really make sense as it's a herbivore, but you know, we'll just go along with it. Its claws are really ones to be scared about, which isn't really in reference to what I was saying. I don't really know what my trail of thought was there. Either way, its claws are obviously where all of its damage is going to come from, and its saddle is unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
And you know, that Michael Rosen joke is just perfect, and I always have to sneak it in whenever I get the chance with the Theory top 10s. And yeah, the Theory also has another great use on the island. This thing is an extremely useful creature for the dragon boss fight. One which seems like on the surface, why don't you go for a Rex? But when you dive and you analyze that boss fight, you realize it's got a pretty nasty ability that really affects carnivores, but herbivores not so much. Next up, we have the Snow Owl, and this creature just has to be on the list. It has so many great uses that I can't discount it, and it definitely has that very premium feel, and it feels like you're being treated right and on top of the world really. Albeit this isn't the most powerful creature out there, but I don't really get that premium feel out of the most powerful creatures. As with creatures like the Giga, their stamina is abysmal, and I kind of feel like I've been scammed a little bit. The Giga is still a great creature, I'm not saying it's rubbish, I just don't really get any kind of premium feel from it. Whereas the Snow Owl, this creature is just absolutely great when it comes to controlling this thing, which is, in my opinion, an essential part of a creature. If its controls are just awful and feel awful, you're not really going to like using that creature, but it's just so satisfying to glide around and use all of its abilities. For example, that heat-seeking ability. Not too useful for PvE players, unless you're obviously searching for a small tame or a creature which has gone missing of sorts. But on the PvP scenarios, this is a lot more useful, as you can track down some players if they try to raid your base, or if you think they are trying to raid your base. Also, you want to level up loads of stamina on these things, as they heal really quickly, obviously when they have enough stamina, because that's an ability where they have, which you've seen there, they will essentially just freeze all the creatures around them in a radius, and then boom, like that, they heal up, which is actually slightly better than the Daedon's healing ability in some cases. unless there's just loads of enemy creatures around in your near proximity, as you're also going to be healing up those. But if you're healing up a wild creature, which you're trying to tame, as you've just chucked loads of Trank arrows into it, and it's about to die, that's a really useful PvE scenario for it. Now, I talked about the Barry earlier, and the Barry just has to be on this list. This is probably the best caving creature next to the Shadowmane, in my opinion. That is another great caving creature, but I still always go back to the Barry, probably mainly for nostalgia reasons, as you could say so many things which are better about the Shadowmane than the Baryonyx, especially when it comes to mobility. But still, the Baryonyx is a very mobile creature, and for its day, when it came out, this was it was just the best at caving. And sadly, it's been overtaken by creatures like the Shadowmane, but I still use this thing for some reason, because nostalgia's a big thing in my Ark playing. I know I'm not the most efficient player. Some people will get angry at me for that, but I just love the nostalgia around this creature. But it is still definitely a very useful one to this day, which many people use, again, for that caving. But why is it so good for caving? Mainly, obviously, because its size, and the fact that for its size, it deals a really nice amount of damage and has a good enough health stat to keep up with it, as you don't need the biggest health pool for cave runs, as you're probably not going to be in there for that long. And if you press right click too, these things will do a spin attack, which can stun creatures up to the size of the Megalodon. And it is a good shout if you want to do some underwater caves too, due to that ability, obviously. Speaking of the Shadowmane, we do have the Shadowmane next, and I have to put this thing higher than the Barry. Like, I love the Barry so much, but for everything else apart from caving, the Shadowmane just has such a premium and elite feel to it. If the Xboxes were to sell the 360 elites again, the Shadowmane would definitely be the chosen creature over something like the Baryonyx. Again, its mobility and its controls, they just feel so smooth. Like, just look how high this thing can jump. It's absolutely insane. These things can travel immense distances, and for land creatures, it's insane. And if this came out on Ark the Island in 2015, people would have been so shocked. But, you know, Gen 2 is a really OP map, and it isn't just great in the skies as well, it feels amazing in the water too. Don't take that out of context. I plead you not to take that sentence out of context. But their only real downside is obviously the fact that the taming method is absolutely awful, or at least it is to me, but, you know, a lot of people agree with that statement. Right, next up we have the Reaper. Obviously the Reaper Queen, no, the Reaper King, not the Reaper Queen. What am I talking about? You can't tame Reaper Queens, you can tame Reaper Kings. But for some reason, I made this bureau with a Reaper Queen. Don't ask why. If you spotted that, well done. You can effectively identify a Reaper Queen apart from a Reaper King. But either way, the point still stands, it is still a Reaper of sorts. Obviously, no Reaper Queen tames, that doesn't exist. Reaper King tames. In terms of their taming method though, it is definitely one which somehow feels premium, even though it is one of the most annoying taming methods in the game probably, and there's so many steps to it. But once you do it, and while you're doing it, you just feel like you're on top of the world, as long as it's going well. If it's going awful, then the premium experience is not there. But once tamed, you really do feel all of the effort that you put in. This creature is so powerful, and it just tears through everything on Arboration, and nothing really can compare to it. And if you want to add a little other Arboration creature as an honorable mention, it's not little, the Karkanos is a pretty elite feeling creature as well, but sadly, obviously, it has not made this list. Now we have the Maywing, and when it comes to travelling, this creature simply has to be put here. Its controls feel so good, and my main claim to fame with this creature is the fact that I have done the Alpha Maywing race mission with this thing, which a beginner Maywinger, if that's the correct verb, Maywinger, it's a verb now, Maywinger, it wouldn't be a verb, what am I talking about? Either way, a beginner Maywinger wouldn't be able to do it on Alpha, probably on Gamma though, that is quite an easy mission to do on Gamma. But in terms of obviously their premium feel, these things feel even more premium due to the level you actually get these things at. And on Gen 2 you can get these things as early as level 19 and use them as early as level 19 because that's when the saddle's unlocked. Obviously you can tame one before then, but you unlock the saddle for this thing before you even unlock Trank arrows, and that's insane because every single time I've tamed this thing, I've used Tran carriers, apart from one which I did with the club, so technically that's a lie. Also, they do have a very premium feel when it comes to the milk which they produce, being a portable feeding trough, and it just gets a lot of the hassle away from breeding, and they can gather berries too. It really feels like this creature is just packed with every ability which you could really want out of it. In at number 3 is the RG, and the RG just has to be put in that top 3, as the RG is that creature which I always look to when I go for metal runs, and the premiumness, if that's even a word, over the Pteranodon is insane. In fact, that even sometimes in my gameplay, I won't even go for a Pteranodon, I'll just go straight for this creature if I feel up to taming it, as I usually don't trap these things, as I'm a bit stupid when it comes to taming RGs, so I usually give myself a really horrible time with these creatures, which is sometimes why I struggle to tame these things. It's really stupid. I should just make a trap. They're not that difficult to tame. They really aren't. I wouldn't say they're difficult at all. Just, I like to play Ark the difficult way. Does anyone else do that with RGs as well, or is that just me? Also, in terms of the creatures which they can pick up as well, they can pick up a Wealth, and the Doedicurus and Anki are going to be great pairings with this thing, as they are great gatherers of resources, and it is really the creature which is going to transport you from areas of when you're gathering resources, as it has weight reduction on things like metal, crystal, obsidian, those resources which are obviously, don't know why I can say obviously there, very essential to any Ark player's life in terms of, you know, actually completing the game. They're very useful resources. Also, its saddle actually has a portable smithy, which not many other creatures have, and it has a nice little neat regen ability on top of all of that too. So why don't you just tame the RG? Just tame this thing. In at number 2, we have the Desmodus. And is there any creature which really treats you better than the creature which is in at number 1 on this list? Obviously, this is in at number 2. Well, not really, and that is obviously why it is in at number 2. This creature feels so elite in its form, like nothing really gets better than Desmodus, apart from thing number 1. But in terms of its uses, that Sanguine Elixir is an absolute game changer for doing any kind of taming, as a third of it's done for you, and for official Ark players out there, that is an absolute godsend, and I'm sure you'll be taming these things as quickly as you possibly can. And someone said recently, well, this thing really isn't a great creature because it can't pick up stuff, and I don't really use that out of a flyer, surprisingly, and I prefer all the other abilities this thing has, like gliding, being able to go invisible, not on the Extinction Wastelands as it's never night, don't know why I chose this map, and also just the fact of how cool this creature is to ride around. I don't need that ability, and it doesn't need it at all. And in at number 1 is the Deinonychus, and I just have to put this thing in at the number 1 spot, as its controls feel great, and all of its abilities, which I'll get to in a second, are so good, not even any other Ark creature can actually have the claim to fame ability which this creature wields. Obviously, why it is just such a useful creature. Its first ability, obviously being that it can, obviously, what am I saying? The first ability, sorry, the fact that it can grapple onto creatures and just absolutely tear them to shreds. And that is something which you can't see on any other Ark creature. It has that, and it has even more abilities too. Obviously, it's going to have that pack buff, and the bleed ability that you saw there is going to deal bleed damage, which is great for any carnivore to have. I was going to say essential there. It's not, as not all carnivores have the bleed ability. Doesn't really make sense when you think about it, but it is very nice, and its main claim to fame is it can deal that on bosses too, which no other Ark creature, as far as my knowledge goes, can do. Comment me down below if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's no other creature. Either way, this is one of the best boss creatures out there, and you have to try it, especially with that pack buff. They are great in packs, and with that bleed, man, these creatures are insane. And they're also really good at parkour as well, and their controls feel really nice when you get them right. And I'm not the best Deinonychus parkourer, if that's even the right word for it, as I'm a bit rusty. I haven't really practiced with these things a lot in recent times, but definitely tame yourself a Deinonychus.
In at number 10, we have the Crystal Wyvern, and there are many reasons why I think that this creature should make the list, and the first reason for it is because of just how easy these things are to tame, but also just how useful they are on top of that as well. They pretty much just have the same use as the Wyvern, and they even have the hydration buff, although maybe not all to the most useful, as you know, you kind of need to like get those wings in the water without you actually touching the water. That's not the most useful thing for these creatures to have, but they do have it, which is, it's nice to have, I guess. And with their tame method being a passive one, it becomes a lot easier than a normal Wyvern tame. And yes, you do need Primal Crystal, which you know you get by knocking out a Wyvern, Crystal Wyvern of course, and you need to be level 65. I still think it's a lot easier than the normal Wyvern tame, and they're just so useful for general early game flying travel. And you might think, well, level 65 really isn't an early game level. A very basic note run can get you there and even further pretty quickly within your first hour of Ark, unless if you're playing official, that's probably not going to work out for you quite as well. But quite a lot of people these days aren't really playing official, so you know, a lot of people actually watching this channel do play single player, so it would definitely work for that, as everything's 2.5 times if you haven't fiddled with all of these settings anyway. So yep, that's why the Crystal Wyvern is on the list. Next up, we've got the Maywing, and this really is a really great travel mount for me. Don't know why I needed so many reallys in there for me, but you know, either way, this is like the fastest travel mount out there, and it really does act as a good one. Again, the really is returning. More reallys please, I guess. Either way, essentially this uses the gliding technique rather than the just general flying technique, which can be a little bit of a disadvantage, but still I really think it does play a just general huge part in my Ark traveling, because gliders usually tend to have a faster speed, and the Maywing isn't all too bad on flatter terrain compared to a creature like the Rock Drake, which came earlier. It doesn't feel as ergonomic to control as the Maywing, and that might just be because I've spent less time with it, or it might just be that it actually can't really handle those flatter terrains quite as well. But also, the Maywing isn't just a gliding mount. This thing also really does pack a punch when it comes to breeding, as it acts as a portable feeding trough, and it can gather berries on top of that as well. The only slight downside is that animation is a little bit disturbing, but the fact you can get this thing saddle at level 19, it really is an absolute godsend to have this creature. Next up, we've got the Megalodon, and this may be a little bit of an unpopular opinion among many of you, but I actually really like this creature as an underwater tame. And yes, the Basilo is a really great one, and you could do that as well. And there actually is another creature which I use for underwater travel, which is much later on in the list, which I use over this thing. But actually, just for general, like for doing the Moda and just for general underwater travel, I will use this creature. Like most of the time, you could say. Maybe I'd use the other creature, which I'm not going to spoil what it is, but just like mainly, I would say mainly for combat underwater, or if I'm maybe like transporting some stuff and I need to actually kind of pack more of a punch down in the underwater depths, I will take a Megalodon with me, because I'm not going to take a Moda. They're just a bit too big and bulky for me, and although Basilo does work, it does have that depth limit, so no, not the friendliest, and a Megalodon really can fight back, apart from like electric eels and jellyfish, which it struggles with a little bit, but I still think, considering its size and its damage and the fact that it deals bleed, it's a really great creature to have. In at number 7, we have got the RG, and this creature really is a huge one when it comes to me and just my general Ark day-to-day life, as this creature is so useful for just getting around the map and just getting things done, really. When you look at this creature and you look at how much metal it can transport because of that weight stat, and you look at how easy it is to tame, it really is a truly great one, which I can't not use at all in Ark. I have to use this creature. It's partly maybe some nostalgia reasons, because I've been using the RG for absolutely ages, but I really think this is like one of the best flyers in the game. It's a pretty good travel mount, although maybe not the quickest out there, and it really does pack a punch in the damage department, which you maybe wouldn't expect quite as much, because you know it's an RG. You wouldn't expect to do that much damage. It can also carry creatures in its beak as well, which is kind of nice, but I don't really need to carry a Dodo around with me in its beak, so I don't really use that all too much. Its saddle also acts as a smithy, so if any of your metal stuff breaks along the way, you can always just repair that. If you have some metal ingots on you, it's not going to refine metal ingots like a Phoenix does. And also, when it kills something and then it eats that dead corpse, it will get a regen buff, which, you know, it's a nice ability for it to have. Next up, we have got the Snow Owl, and in my opinion, this just has a slight edge over the RG in quite a lot of factors, and maybe almost everything apart from the metal gathering and travel and the fact that it's got the regen buff and the smithy as a saddle. But the Snow Owl has some more compelling features, you could say, which make this a better creature in my opinion, and one which I am more likely to go for. Obviously it's less accessible because it doesn't spawn on the island, but still I really do think this is a better creature for me and probably a lot of players out there. Namely, this creature is significantly faster than the RG, and it does have that gliding ability. You could kind of say it's more of a diving ability. It's something along those lines. It's not really like a glide that a glider would have because it is a flyer, but it really does tremendously speed up these creatures. But it also has kind of a heat vision ability, which, you know, is actually quite nice to have for me as a PvE player, because if I ever lose a creature for some reason, like, I can quite easily find it. It tends to be wild, not really tamed ones, because I use creature find deluxe for that and I can just find them anyway. But still, in a pinch, just if you want to find a small wild creature around you, it's quite useful to have. You also want to crank that stamina, not just so they can fly long distances, but they can actually heal up dinos. They're essentially just a Daedon on steroids. You can't really use these things in like general standard boss fights because they don't allow flyers in, and obviously this thing's not allowed in. But for like just if you want to heal up Ark creatures, or if you want to heal up wild creatures, if you're taming something and then its health got really low because you were just tranking it for ages and you just need to give it a break so you can continue tranking it, just heal it up with this creature and then you don't have to wait for ages, and then its torpor won't go down quite as much, and yeah, you're going to have a much more successful tame. And obviously if you feed the Snow Owl pellets to Gatchers, you really are going to get some insane loot. I know that has been nerfed since release, but still you can get some quite OP stuff. So I really do recommend the Snow Owl if you've never had one already. Next up, in number 5, we've got the Shadowmane, and this creature is just here for its insanely great mobility and just general overall skill in boss scenarios, combat scenarios, travel scenarios, underwater scenarios, and just generally being a really great creature overall. Firstly, this thing does have really high mobility stats. Like it can zoom across the map and it can kind of jump really high. It's a little bit scary actually. You should always beware if you're on a flyer and there's a Shadowmane, because it can just jump up and just absolutely decimate you. But also these things do have the pack buff, they can go invisible, and they have the hydration buff too, which again barely any creatures have, and it makes a lot more sense for this creature than like the Crystal Wyvern, because they're a land creature, so you can actually go underwater with these things, and they are actually really great in that scenario. The only real downside to these creatures is the tame method is pretty annoying, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong with it. But once you do have one, you really do have yourself an insanely great mount, which I think all of you out there should be taming, as long as you have a map where this thing actually spawns on, as it truly is a terrific creature. Next up, we have got the Desmodus, and in my opinion, this thing just kind of had to be here for several reasons. Like, this thing can make Sanguine Elixir, which is absolutely OP, and also on top of that as well, this creature is just really mobile, and it can also pick players off mounts as well, which is quite OP for any given PvP scenarios. And on top of that, does have the gliding ability as well, which, you know, does play quite a big benefit to it. And although maybe its tame method can be a little bit annoying, this thing can farm blood bags as well. So once you've got one, the next one is going to be significantly easier than the next, but it kind of does go like that for quite a lot of tames out there. Once you have one, it makes it easier to do the next one, unless it's just a knockout tame, then it's pretty much the same each time, and then it just depends on what kind of resources you have at the time. But yeah, the Desmodus truly is a great creature, and considering it spawns on Fjorda, it's really accessible to pretty much all Ark players out there, apart from Switch and mobile players, although they do tend to make up a smaller minority of the general population of Ark players out there. This may be unpopular, but in number 3, I've got the Baryonyx, and why am I putting this thing above the Desmodus? Well, I think it's more of a useful creature to me, and although that 30% on tames is such a cool ability to have, the usefulness of this creature being such a great caving mount to me, and considering how useful doing caves is in Ark compared to like getting 30% taming on a creature, to me the Baryonyx just seems like the better option, which I'd go for. I know it isn't a flyer and all of that, and maybe it doesn't have as many abilities behind it, but it's so invaluable for all of its caving abilities. And with its one kind of ability which it does have, it makes it pretty useful for the underwater caves, as it can stun creatures up to the size of a megalodon. You see that a little bit later in the B-roll. And considering it's got pretty good health, pretty decent damage, very good mobility, especially for a carnivore, but it does make sense considering its size. It's really good underwater as well. It's got actually some pretty decent speed on it, which again does make it a really great caving mount, as you do probably want quite a quick creature. What even? It's like I've got a dysfunction with saying R sounds, but yeah, that's why I put the barrier at number 3. Feel free to disagree with me. It's just my opinion really on this creature. I really like the Barry. At number 2, we have got the Bloodstalker, and in my opinion, this is the best ocean creature. And you might not think of it like that, but for me, this is the epitome of ocean travel. This creature absolutely soars under the water, and although in this bureau I've got absolutely nothing which shows this actually being underwater, I only skim over the top of it. I'll probably have to change that when these things come out in ASA, or I might just redo the B-roll for this creature at some point, because I really do use these things for underwater travel a lot. They can quickly get away from electric eels and jellyfish, which again makes them quite useful for that job, because they are absolute pests of the ocean and you're not going to have a good time if you encounter one of them. These creatures also just on the land as well really do have quite a lot of speed behind them, which really again does benefit them quite heavily. And also on top of that, if you're on Gen 1, you can get some hexagons out of these things by doing some missions with them. And I've actually done the alpha mission for the bog race. I know maybe not the biggest achievement, but you can definitely fly the Bloodstalker once you've done that. I'm a little bit rustier now just for general travelling around, because I mainly just use these things for underwater travel, and that's what I prefer them for, and that's kind of what I use these creatures for. But they are just packed with loads of other abilities as well, and you kind of turn into Spider-Man when riding this thing. And also their tame method is the exact same as the Desmodus. I should really say it the other way around, because obviously this creature came first, and thanks to the Desmodus actually being able to get loads of blood bags, it also does make Bloodstalker taming a lot easier. So I do actually really thank that creature for coming out and allowing Bloodstalker Tames to be easier, because it really is a great creature. And finally, in at number 1 is the Deinonychus, and this really does just play such a huge role for me in just general amazingness of Ark creatures. It really is a great boss creature, and it's really just great for general ability and just generally kind of everything in Ark apart from resource gathering, although you know you have some other creatures that you can use the Anki and all of that, but I tend to not spend a lot of time talking about resource gatherers in Ark. I kind of just don't really appreciate them as much, and I probably should, but this thing can do bleed damage to bosses, which is kind of an insane ability to have, which no other Ark creature has. And this thing, it really does bosses well. Like, you compare it to any other creature on the islands which can go into the bosses, and it does so much better than them, and it can kill them so quickly, especially because it has the pack buff, so you can just absolutely decimate tons of creatures. And again, that high mobility really is going to play a huge role when it comes to actually killing those bosses, and also just avoiding those bosses as well, because having a high mobility, you know, it's easy to get away from things, and you can kind of deal more damage just by hopping around it. You can it's not in most cases, but still there are some cases where that tends to work. It's mainly just for dodging stuff rather than dealing more damage, but also you can just see they're great for just general traversing of normal maps too, which again does play a huge benefit, and they can just be used as like normal travel mounts. And especially considering how easy they are to tame, they really are a no-brainer, and I think everyone should be taming themselves a Deinonychus. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you enjoyed this one. And as always, comment down below, what is your must-have Ark tame? Do you agree with this list? If not, comment your top 10 down below, and as always, I'll see you all later.